think one of the most important things we can do is to instill confidence and in heightened moments, in those very, very difficult moments. If we can manage our emotions and how we handle ourselves, then they can learn that they can do that themselves, right?
Welcome to Single Parent Success Stories, a podcast designed to inspire single parents. Here you'll find resources from self-care to finances to parenting and everything in between. Discover what it takes to thrive. Let the stories inspire you to what is possible. Hello and welcome to Single Parent Success Stories. Today we have a special guest, Kyle Jetsel. For years, Kyle and now his deceased wife, Shelley, struggled raising 6 strong-willed kids. Nothing seemed to be off limits for the seemingly feral crew, from biting, kicking, and screaming to defiance, arguments, fights, and threats, to then even physical confrontation. When the books and training and specialists and therapists failed to help with at-home challenges, it became vital to better understand how to parent the kiddos in a spirit of love. Through the secrets learned, stress was dramatically lowered for everyone and transformed the Jetsel family into a top 1% happy family. Welcome, Kyle. It is a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Irina. It's good to be here. I'm excited to chat with you this morning.
Thank you. So please share with us your story. How did you become a single parent? And
So in October of 2021, my wife, Shelley, passed away suddenly. We had been married for 30 years, and now I found myself a single parent after 30 years of marriage. And the challenges really began at that point. That's really where things started to get a little tricky for me. I relied on her heavily to help guide the kids, and then it all fell upon me at that point. So
yeah. But sorry to hear about your loss. It must have been difficult, but the framework you have established with Shelley before she was gone, did that help you kind of keep on going?
yeah, absolutely it did. It was interesting. My wife and I, when you have kids that challenge you at every turn, it can create a world of a lot of stress, right? You're just looking to have your kids and I think this is probably where we all mess up, is we think our kids should just obey us or just be good kids, right? And the truth is, when they're strong-willed or spirited, they're trying to figure out the world too. And so they're trying things to see what works and what doesn't work. And a lot of times, as parents, we can get to where it's easier not to fight the kids. And in a lot of cases, long term, that can be detrimental to them and to us, because we don't stand up when we need to, and we get exhausted or overwhelmed or tired, and then we let our kids get away with things or do things that we probably don't like. And it's understandable, because we work hard, right? And we just get worn out. And they're learning from those experiences. They're learning what works and what doesn't work. And if they find out that they can outlast us, then it can become a problem for us moving forward. So
Totally. So how did you deal? What helped you? How did you get recovered from stressful family into happy family? Was it where did you start?
I think one of the most powerful things my wife did before she passed is she made me understand that our kids they're like velociraptors, right? I don't know if you remember the movie Jurassic Park, but in the movie Jurassic Park, the velociraptors are very smart and they're creative, and they're always testing. And so that, in the movie, they have them in a big cage, but they have electrified fences around the very top of the cage. And they discover that the velociraptors are systematically testing those fences all day long, every day, and they never stop, right? And in the movie, what ends up happening is they have to turn off the electricity for 30 seconds. And when they do, the velociraptors escape because they're testing. And when they find out those fences aren't electrified, they escape and they take over the island, right? And they become the dominant creature on the island. And my wife, I feel grateful that she kind of discovered that our kids are always going to be testing the fences to see what works. They have all day long, every day, to find out, how to press our buttons, or how to manipulate situations, or how to figure out ways to get what they think they want short term. Because kids can't really see long term. They're looking at the short term today, and so they're doing things to get what they want today. And so it was a real powerful vision for me to see that, and it made me start to realize why they are doing what they do, right? And they're creative, and they're and it's not because they're bad, it's because they're kids. That's what kids are supposed to do. They're supposed to figure out the world around them. And the problem is, a lot of times we don't give them the guides they need, right? We let the fences, we turn off the electricity in the fences, and they try different things, and those things work. And then they start to get their way, and then they don't understand, the long-term effects of just always getting their way or getting everything they want. So that, it really helped me to start to understand. I used to wonder, why are these kids doing this? Why don't they it's just easier to wash the dishes when I ask, or it's easier to, make up your bed. Why does everything have to be a fight? Or why do they have to challenge me on everything I try to present to them, right? And the reason is because it's who they are. They're trying to figure out the world, and we don't want to break them of their spirit. Rather, we want to help guide them in the direction where they can use that strong will for good in the world. And so it's really important, I think, for us to understand who we're working with here in a lot of cases. And once we understand who they are a little bit more, then it helps us to understand how we can work with them to give them the tools they need to succeed in life. So
Totally, I love that. How did you discover, who your kids are? What helped you?
Well, a lot of times I think we discover a lot of things through failure. And I think sometimes we get pushed to the absolute limit before we realize we have to make a change. I'll never forget one Saturday morning. At the time, I had 4 little boys, and one Saturday morning, one of my sons woke up the whole house at 6:30 in the morning on a Saturday, just screaming and yelling about something. And this son, my son, has severe autism, and so we couldn't understand what he wanted, what he needed, but we knew he was screaming. And you know how it is when you get woke up and with a scream. It's just horrible. And we kept trying to work with him to figure out what it was. We couldn't understand what he was trying to tell us. And typically, those kinds of events can last anywhere from 15 minutes before we get them settled down to maybe an hour at the most. Well, this challenging behavior lasted 4 hours. And I think we would get him calmed down a little bit, and he would ramp back up and start screaming again. My older 2 sons locked themselves in their room to avoid everything. My wife and I are frazzled. We're stressed out. We don't know how to help him. We don't know what to do. We just have a kid screaming and yelling. He's throwing things. He wasn't above crossing normal lines. He's hitting out. He's lashing out. He's doing all these things. And I remember finally, after about 4 hours, we finally got him calmed down. And it was so stressful that my wife and I turned on each other. And this is common, right? I mean, when things aren't going well, you look for somebody to blame.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, it's the person right next to you, right? And that's what happened in this case. My wife turned on me and she said, if you would just show him more love, he would have calmed down quicker. I said, he needs more discipline. We just were battling each other and kind of attacking each other. And after a few minutes of this, I realized this wasn't going to be helpful long term. I mean, this argument was not stopping. So I went out on the front porch, and I remember grabbing my keys. I had them in my pocket. And at that moment, the stress in our home was so overwhelming that I thought, I can't live like this. This is not what I signed up for. And I considered leaving. I'm going to leave. I'm going to start over. This is not what I signed up for. And in that moment, a memory of my father popped into my mind. And it was a memory when I was playing a sport as a little boy. And we were about to win the game. And the ball came to me, and I messed up, and we ended up losing because of me. It was my fault. And I remember turning to my dad after the game, and I said, I wish they wouldn't have hit the ball to me, because then we could have won. And my dad was so smart in that moment, because he got down on my level and he said, you know what, Kyle, that's not the way we do things in this life. If you don't ever want to pass your success or failure to someone else, you want to be the reason. He said, now you're going to mess up a lot, because we're all human. We all do. But don't ever try to pass the buck to anybody else. Don't ever try to pass off your success or failure. If something is important to you, don't ever go down without the biggest fight, and just do what you can and let the chips fall where they may. So, and I remember when that crossed my mind, I thought, I can't leave my family. My kids are important. I've got to figure this out. It's up to me. And so, I did, in that moment, I did something else my father had taught me to do, and that was to pray. And I went under a big tree in our front yard, and I knelt down and started to pray. And I remember feeling like God told me in that moment, the problem is not your kids, and the problem is not your wife. The problem is you. You've got to get better. You can be the reason that this is fixed. And I remember, at first I didn't like that, because it didn't feel like I was the problem, right? It felt like everything else was the issue, and I was doing my best. But that in that moment, I realized, I really can't change my kids. I can't change my wife, but I can change my reactions. I can change how I approach situations. And I decided in that moment, you know what, I'm gonna figure this out. And I don't care if I ever completely figure it out. I'm gonna be so intent on figuring this out that I'll die trying if I have to, but I'm never giving up. And I was gonna take my dad's advice. And I went inside in that moment, and I remember my wife was still mad. And I said to her, I'm not leaving, and I'm gonna fix this. And she said to me in that moment, good luck. And I realized she had lost faith in me as a husband and a father. And my job at that point was to start to change the way I started reacting to things, to adjust and make the adjustments I needed to earn back her respect and gain back that. And then also change the way I reacted to certain situations in our home. And that really became a tipping point for our family, because I decided that, I was going to try my very best to stay in a loving spirit. As anytime anything went wrong, I was going to try to put myself in a spirit of love. And that changes the way you react to situations. When you do things in a spirit of love, it automatically puts you in a better state of mind, and it allows you to do things that are healthier long term for yourself and for your kids. And it was interesting because, we've all been in situations where, and I'll talk about traffic, when you're driving home and you get stuck in traffic, right? If you're in a hurry, that traffic makes you crazy, right? You get all bent up and crazy, right? And it's frustrating, and you're angry and you're exhausted. But if you're not in a hurry, sometimes you turn on the music and you just enjoy the moment, and you listen to soft music, or you do whatever you do. And it's the same traffic, it's the same event, but it's a different approach to the same moment. And so I decided that I was going to take that different approach, put myself in a spirit of love, and try to approach things from that angle. And it changed the way dramatically that I handled situations with my wife, with my kids, and with everybody in my life. And it really set the tone for discovering different strategies and tools that helped us to better parent our kids moving forward.
I love that. And you're so right. The only thing we can really control is how we react to things, because things will happen. We don't always have rainbows and unicorns, and we do have sometimes pickles. We have sometimes pebbles, challenges that we deal with, and it's how we approach things. Because they say the person who screams the most, they are in pain, and they are unable to express that pain other than screaming. And as opposed to feeling or thinking like, oh, why are they doing this annoying thing to disturb us? When we, like you say, when we in a spirit of love, we change the way we feel, we change how we think, and as a result, our response will be so much better, as opposed to reacting like somebody's pushing your button, but responding to a situation with a different frame of mind. And in the traffic. I like that you make that example. I just say, bless this road, bless this traffic, whoever is going. And then the things start moving. And when we are in a rush, we are always we feel like we are in this cocoon, or we feel so closed off that any disturbance suddenly gives us in disarray. So bringing ourselves, I guess, with a spirit of love and seeing different perspective makes for a better world for yourself, how you feel internally, and also for people in your immediate surroundings. So I love that you have done that for yourself, and you kind of changed, and not only help yourself but also help your family along the way, how to cohesively work together, respond to one another without getting aggravated or upset, and finding a better solution. What do you think is the most important trait to instill in a child?
That's a great question. I don't, I think one of the things that I think ended up happening in our family is that, our kids, they're velociraptors, so they're learning, right? They're learning all kinds of things in this world, and they're learning a lot of things from us. And they're watching us, and they're watching how we model our world. And so I think, I think one of the most important things we can do is to instill confidence and in heightened moments, in those very, very difficult moments. If we can manage our emotions and how we handle ourselves, then they can learn that they can do that themselves, right? I've got a couple of sons that, you talked about pressing buttons, and it's very interesting because my sons would try different things with my wife and me, and they would say things that they knew would get my wife out of sorts. My one son would say, I hate you. And it would make my wife, it would flip a switch in her brain where she was just incapable of handling things anymore, right? And she actually created a strategy. It was really interesting. She went out and bought some red paper, and she wrote down on the front side of this red paper the words, I hate you, because she knew she had to be cognizant of what would press her buttons. And so she wrote down, I hate you on a red button. And then she flipped it over and wrote down what she would normally do, right? Her natural reaction. And then she scratched that out and wrote a new reaction, right? And then she even stuck it on the part of her body that it hurt. It hurt her heart whenever my son would say, I hate you to her. And what it did for her is when he would say, I hate you, and she would remember, okay, I know what he's trying to do, and I know what he normally does, right? My natural reaction, but I'm not going to have that reaction anymore. I'm going to have a different reaction and do this in a spirit of love. And the next time he said it, she was able to trigger herself into a more productive state, right? And express more love. And she didn't really wait to create new strategies. She started doing them real time, right? And when she did that, it changed him, because he would say, I hate you. And instead of her flipping out and saying, wait till your dad gets home, you're in serious trouble, you're grounded for a month, she changed, right? And she would say something completely different. And he was shocked, like, right? She changed her patterns, and it made him change his patterns. Now, that doesn't mean he didn't try new things, right? Because they're velociraptors. Because he knew if he could get her out of sorts, he could get his way, or she would leave him alone, or whatever the case may be, whatever he was trying to do, because he's learning how things work, right? So I think one of the most, and what it did for him was it modeled the kind of behavior that we should be able to expect from ourselves as adults. And it instilled in him, oh, I see, when things go wrong, my mom doesn't, or my dad doesn't flip out. They calm themselves and they thoughtfully think about how to approach this difficult situation, right? And so instilling in them the ability to discipline their minds and think through things when things get really hard was a very, very powerful thing. And I think it really helped us tremendously when she passed away, right? Because all kinds of crazy things go into your mind, grief and anger and frustration and discouragement and loss and fear. Those are all emotions that can lead us down scary paths. But watching her be able to manage the thoughts and then approach things, in a spirit of love, it instilled that confidence in them. And then when things would go wrong in their lives, they would say, wait a minute, I know I've got to thoughtfully consider, right? I mean, all these emotions are naturally real, but it doesn't mean I have to stay in those emotions. I can make decisions and I can calm myself and I can make logical decisions and emotional decisions that are going to lead me towards success and happiness, as opposed to just the natural things that come into my mind, the bitterness and the anger and the frustration and the discouragement, because those are going to bleed back out of us into the world, and they're going to create unhappy worlds for us and for other people. So I think the greatest thing we can instill our kids is a sense of understanding. You are going to have these emotions initially come into your mind, but being able to stop and say, is that emotion going to lead me to love and kindness and joy? Or is there another emotion that I can replace it with that will lead me towards goodness, right? And watching her do that gave them the confidence that they could do it, right? If she can do it, I can do it. And she showed them how to do that. And so it really helped them you know, as they had to move forward without her. And so that's one of them. I think instilling the confidence that your kids can. I hear a lot of people talk about emotional intelligence, but I don't like that word because it makes people. I don't care how intelligent you are. If you can't manage your emotions, you're going to get yourself in trouble. If you let the emotion of anger or bitterness or frustration overwhelm you, that's going to cause damage, and it's going to bleed out into your family and into the world, right? And it's going to cause damage to you. And it feels justified. Sometimes when we face these things, it feels justified to be angry or bitter or frustrated but we also have a choice in that moment. What other emotions can I replace that with, though, that'll allow me to move forward with hope and courage? And instilling that in my kids has been I've been amazed as I watch my kids excel because they understand those things. And that was modeled for them by their parents, by her.
I love that. I think that's beautiful and wonderful, and that you were able to witness that for yourself. And I guess you took example from your wife and then applied it on yourself as well. And I do agree, confidence is important, and especially how we deal with situations. It's not what we tell our kids, but it's how, like you said, they're always watching us. It's how we deal with challenges, as opposed to, or when somebody is screaming and you raise your voice, like, stop screaming, you're already screaming yourself. And like, what are you showing your kids? You want them to be quiet while you are the one screaming.
Yeah. I worked with a parent who I was talking to her and she was so frustrated. She was almost screaming at me. And she said, if I could just get that kid to learn to manage his reactions. And she was screaming at me, right? And I said, hold on, hold on. Do you realize how can you expect him to manage his emotions when you're screaming at me right now? You're so frustrated by this. I said, he's watching you. So he's learning from you what works. And so you're screaming right now. I said, your first step is really to learn to manage your own emotions. And one of the best ways I think that we can do that is to try to think of things as, instead of frustration, think of fascination, right? Because when we're frustrated, it makes us do crazy things. But if situations frustrate us and we say, you know what, I'm not going to be frustrated by this, I'm going to be fascinated. That changes our mentality and it makes it look at, why are these people doing this? What reasons are behind this? What are they trying to get at? It makes us more curious. And curiosity allows us to learn how to work with those other individuals, especially our kids. When we're curious about why they're doing what they're doing, instead of being frustrated by why they're doing what they're doing, it allows us to kind of dig in, and it changes first our mental out approach to how this is working. and it allows us to understand our kids better. And you mentioned uh, loving our kids, right? And I spoke at a conference a few years ago, and afterwards, I had a couple of young men come up to me and say, we wish our parents knew what you were teaching, because then they would have loved us. And I said, what? I said, what do you mean they would have loved you? And they said, our parents didn't love us. And I said, how can did they tell you they loved you? And they said, yeah, but they didn't act like it. And I said, whoa, right? I said, what did they do? And they said, well, they screamed a lot and they yelled a lot and they were always mad at us and they were always trying to get us to do everything. And they just didn't, they thought, they didn't think the words I love you meant anything anymore. They thought the actions were really what proved the love, right? And I said, no, no. I said, your parents were doing the best they could. They just didn't have the tools that they needed to calm themselves. And I said, I'm so glad you're hearing this now, because now you can understand your parents' situation. You can go back to them and say, you loved me, didn't you? And just repair that relationship, right? It's hard being a parent, even with typical kids, right? Add in some strong-willed kids, different diagnoses. It can be really tricky. And so it's easy for us as parents to fall into the trap of just reacting to things. And a lot of times our natural reactions are not the things that show our love to our kids. So it's important for us not to just tell our kids we love them, but also when things get hard is to show them we love them in those hard moments. And that's really when our kids start to understand, oh, I'm acting like a crazy maniac, but my mom still loves me, or my dad still loves me, right? Or even after it's all over and we make a mistake, which we do, go to them and say, you know what? I didn't handle that very well. I'm going to try to do better as a parent. But I'm doing my very best and I do love you and I want what's best for you long term. That's why I do what I do. So be patient with me, give me grace, and I'll do the same for you. And we can talk to our kids and let them know we're not perfect and we never will be. And they shouldn't expect that either from themselves, right? It's okay to make mistakes, but we have to take accountability for those mistakes and then give ourselves grace and move forward, with as much love as we can. And I think that's really a key. It's not enough to tell your kids you love them. They need to see it in your actions. And the very best time for you to show it is when it's hard. If you can show love in the hardest moments, they will feel that. They'll absorb that. And they'll take that with them out into the world. And it's a confidence builder to know that you're loved, no matter how you act or what you do. To have a parent that deeply loves you, it gives them confidence in the world and it makes them want to exceed at a higher level, right? Succeed in whatever they do because they feel empowered. I am loved. Even when I'm acting nutty, I'm loved. And it makes me want to go out into the world and be successful because it gives them confidence.
I love what you said. It's so true. Showing love in the toughest moment when it is the hardest is what mostly will be remembered. What advice would you give to single parents?
You know what? One of the things that I've noticed that I never knew before was, if we're not careful, exhaustion can be one of our worst enemies, right? I mean, and so my advice is, our kids, again, they're not bad. They're just kids. They're just doing what they do to learn. And so if our kids can wear us out, right? If they can get us to a point where we're so exhausted, we just give up, they know that's a line they can cross. And then again, not being bad, they're just learning. Mm-hmm. And so one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give is, I have this statement that I've created called I don't do. And then I plug in whatever it is that I think is really a bad thing, right? And I don't do exhaustion. Now, does it mean I'm not exhausted sometimes? No. I am exhausted sometimes. But when my kids come at me when I'm in that state, I will tell myself, this is the moment when I've got to just get a little bit of energy, right? Find it somewhere. And I don't do exhaustion. So I've got to face that challenge in a good spirit, in a happy spirit, even when I feel exhausted. And here's the really cool part is when you face things with love, when you fight with your kids and when you argue and when you scream, it is exhausting. It'll wear you out and you're done, you know? But when you face the same challenge with kindness and patience and love with your kids and stay in that state, it can give you energy. And so, I think the key is to understand you're going to get to a point where you feel exhausted, but almost just tell yourself, listen, I'm not going to do exhaustion anymore with my kids. So if they get me to that state or get me to that point, I've got to recognize that and say, you know what, I'm going to reset myself and I'm going to approach this in a kind, patient, loving way. And however long it takes, and I'm going to face it and I'm going to stay strong and courageous and, work through this with my kids. And it will give you energy. It'll ignite you as a parent and you'll feel better about who you are. There's nothing worse than feeling guilt and shame. Did I do the right thing? Am I a good parent? It can beat you down. And so, but by approaching things in a spirit of love and recognizing that, it's going to help you be empowered and feel, energy as a parent. So that recognize that exhaustion is real, but take the time to say, I've got to, this is when I really, when they're at their worst is when they need you at your best. But when you're tired, it's hard to be at your best, but recognize that and give yourself that little bit of energy you can to battle those things when things are hard. So
I love that. And I love that. I don't do this.
right. I don't do exhaustion. Yep. I don't do it.
So what do you do to recharge your batteries in that moment when they approach you and you got to shift? What do you do for yourself internally?
So I have a strategy that I use called it's called What Am I Thinking? And it's WAIT. It helps me remember it. And I try to manage my thoughts. For me, thoughts become actions and actions become character, right? I mean, it all starts in my mind. And so, a lot of people talk about triggers in their lives and how it can take them down the wrong path, right? They get triggered and they get angry or frustrated. I use triggers to change my spirit from, exhaustion to happiness or joy, right? And so I pay attention whenever I feel frustration or discouragement or anger. I let that be a trigger for me to put myself in a state of love, right? And I ask myself frequently, what am I thinking? Because if I catch myself thinking down a path that's going to take me away from joy or happiness or kindness or love, I need to redirect my thoughts. So for me, I spend a lot of time asking myself, what am I thinking? And it helps me to catch myself early on. So in those moments, it's not a bad idea to write out, here's when I seem to lose my ability to be a good parent, right? When I'm tired or when my kid says this or when, somebody does this, or write those things out and decide ahead of time. You know what? The next time this happens, instead of my natural reaction being this, I'm going to create a new outcome for that trigger. And I'm going to plug into that new outcome and watch what happens. And you'll be surprised at how easy it is to create new triggers. It takes time because your triggers are just natural. They're just automatically happening. But as you replace those with new, more productive thoughts and actions and do it consistently enough, they will start to replace those things. And one of my kids, it's been a while back, but one of my kids did something that they knew they shouldn't do. And I caught them in the middle of it and I smiled. and my son said, "What was that?" I said, "You know what? This is not going to work, son. We've talked about this and I love you, but there's going to be consequences for this. And I don't really want to give you bad consequences, right? But we need to learn." And he said, "It's the craziest thing, Dad, because you're not mad at me." I said, "Listen, you're a kid. You're going to make mistakes. I make mistakes too. I'm an adult, right? But I make mistakes. But there's going to be consequences and you know what they are." And he says, "But you smiled." And I said, I don't want it. You're learning and I'm okay with that. And he said, "I expected you to be angry or frustrated." And I said, "Well, deep down I might be, but I know that's not going to teach you what you need to learn. And I'm not going to scream and yell at you. You saw me and you know. So I smiled because I realize you're a kid, you're learning, and you're going to make mistakes. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to figure this out, right? And then you're not going to do this again because long term this is going to be detrimental to you. It's going to cause you harm. And he said, it's really creepy, Dad, the way you're calm and cool. And I said, you know what? There's no reason for me to yell and scream. I've done that before and it didn't work. How about we figure this out together? You know? And it was interesting to him watching me create a new outcome based on a different approach to the same problem, right? It's being in traffic, right? You're going to get stuck in traffic. You can scream and yell and bang on the steering wheel and be mad and yell at other drivers for cutting you off. And that's exhausting, you know? Or you can turn on some nice music and you can just, let the sun shine on you and just listen, just calm yourself. And I said, and that can create energy, right? And I said, I don't want to be screaming and yelling and fussing at you all the time. One of my theories is kids don't respond to discipline just because it's discipline, but they do respond to discipline when they know you love them. And so, when I smiled and my son looked at me like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. I'm in real trouble. Dad is grinning, I wanted to express to him that I loved him, but what he was doing was not going to be acceptable. And we've got to figure that out, right? And there are going to be consequences. And I don't really want to apply consequences. I don't want to. I'd much rather you have a wonderful, happy, free world where you're capable of doing all kinds of fun stuff. But we've got these rules, we've got these guidelines we have to follow for your long-term health and happiness and joy. And my job as a dad is to discipline you in a spirit of love so that you can discipline yourself when you get out into the world, because the world doesn't love you like I do. If you go out in the world and do this stuff, they'll throw your butt in jail. They don't care. They will do harsh, horrible things to you if you do these kind of things out in the world. I love you, and I want to teach you in our home where there's a lot of grace and a lot of love, so that you've got that. You're armed with that discipline. You're armed with those tools. When you go out into the world, you can manage yourself, without me being around. And so kids respond to that so much better than they do screaming and yelling. And can you just not fight with your brothers and sisters? Can you just not, right? That doesn't really do you much good. It doesn't do your kids much good. But when you go into it in a spirit of love and say, hey, listen, here's how this works. The world is a harsh place, right? We've got to learn to get along with people we don't even like in the world. It's the great place to learn how to get along with people is in your own home. Let's see how we can manage this in a way that we can express love towards each other and kindness and understand each other. And don't be frustrated, be fascinated by your brothers and sister, right? Figure that thing out. And showing them how to do that is a great way to teach those kids.
I love that. And I love your, changing frustration into fascination. It's like they say anytime I called, maybe a bad example, but when you go to give a public speech and you feel all anxious and like worried, oh, I'm gonna forget my words. What if you flip that into excitement? I'm excited. So doing that kind of same thing with frustration and being fascinated. And because, I think as we grow older, we forget how to be curious. We get so complacent in our roles and I have experience. I'm like this person and I know everything. How dare you question my authority? But when you turn on that curiosity, that kind of, there is a different way to do things. There is a different way to approach, different way to respond. And your son's reaction when you grinned at him, it's like, wow, what did I do?
Yeah.
And it probably put him a little bit at ease, as opposed to being afraid of what you're gonna do next to him.
Yeah.
And be more receptive to what you're gonna propose next, as opposed to.
Yeah. And all my sons now are older, and I'm about 6 feet tall, and I'm the shortest of all my boys now.
Oh, wow.
I've got a 6'1", a 6'2", a 6'5". I've got a big giant men for sons now. And years and years ago, I realized that when you parent through fear or guilt or shame, your kids are going to feel controlled and they want to escape. Kids don't want to be controlled, right? But when you parent through fear or shame or guilt or those kind of things, they're going to want to escape. They don't like being controlled, and we don't either. None of us like to feel controlled, right? But when you parent through kindness and patience and love, they feel empowered, right? And so they're not afraid of you. They don't feel guilty for their mistakes. They realize they're humans. They're going to make mistakes, and it gives them courage, right? They're going to go out into the world now, and they're going to make mistakes, and they're going to readjust and learn from those mistakes and move forward, right? And so, I did initially parent with fear, and I remember seeing my boys cower when they were little one time. They were afraid of me, and I thought, oh no, this isn't good, right? If I'm parenting through, it's kind of a default for a lot of us men to do that. That's a default. We as parents do what works too. We're velociraptors too, right? We're watching what works. And sometimes screaming at your kids works short term, right? So we do what works too as parents. The problem is we've got to think through, okay, is that going to be a long-term effective thing for me? Because screaming and yelling and having my boys afraid of me, when they were 3 and 4 and 5, that was fine. But when they hit teenage years, let me tell you something, that caused physical violence, right? They were not going to be controlled. They were bigger than me already. And they're like, he ain't controlling me no more, right? And that is problematic, right? Because then you've got these giant men with no wisdom, right? They're man-sized people, but they're teenagers that have zero knowledge, zero life experience. And it's funny how you say, when I'm an adult, I think I've got, I think I've learned. Kids think that too. They think it too. Let's not fool ourselves. We thought that when we were teenagers too, right? We thought we knew everything, until the world beat the crap out of us, right? And taught us the real lessons of the world. But our kids think that too, right? They think they know everything. And so for us to try to parent with guilt or shame or fear, long term, that creates damaged relationships, and kids that want to escape their parents and don't want to be around them, and parents that are hurting because their kids now don't even want to be around their parents. You spend 18 years raising a kid and then they hate you. That doesn't seem like a good outcome to me, right? And so, but that is what can happen if we default to what naturally comes to us as parents. So we've got to be thoughtful and say, how can I do these things in a spirit of love? How can I stay above the craziness? Because that's what kids are. And give them the guidance they need so that they'll feel empowered and be ready to go out and change the world however they want to do that with their strong will. Because that's a great thing for kids. Once they get out of our house, if they have that strong will and it's been aimed in the right direction, help them aim it, they can go out and make some tremendous changes in this world for the good. If we don't aim it and they're completely out of control, they'll end up in prison, right? Or who knows what's going to happen to them. And then we really feel horrible as parents, right? It's all my fault. And we certainly don't want that long term for them.
Yes, totally. Thank you. Thank you so much. Are there any fun projects you're working on that you like to share?
One of the things I've been doing recently is, my name is Kyle Jetsel. If you go to kylejetsel.com, I have a link on there that says free stuff. And I've written a couple of books. One of them is about the passing of my wife, which is, if you've experienced grief, this will be a good book for you. There's also my wife, prior to her passing, with 6 kids, she couldn't get away sometimes, and she needed self-care. And so she wrote a book called The 90-Day Self-Care for Moms That Don't Have Any Time and Don't Have Any Money. And she wrote out a list of things she would do consistently that made her feel energized and good as a mom. But the thing that I'm most excited about is there's also a map on there. If you're raising strong-willed kids, one of the things that my wife and I discovered is that we were really working hard trying to give these kids what they needed. But we didn't really have a map to where we wanted to go. I mean, it was almost like, it's like racing a race with no finish line, right? You just swim like crazy, and then you just swim like crazy, and you never get to where you want to be, right? And so my wife and I designed a map and we call it the Strong-Willed Kids Success Map. And on one side, it's where you want to get the ultimate outcomes that you want, and on the other side, it's if you keep doing the same things you're doing now, what it's probably going to turn into. And there's a harsh reality between those two sides, and it's kind of scary to think if I just keep doing what I'm doing and don't really, apply some tools and techniques, or if I just keep trying and keep failing, I may end up with a dysfunctional family, and that we don't want that, right? So that's a free map that I give away on my website as well, kylejetsel.com. Go to free stuff. You can see those free things, and I would love for you to download any of those and let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your feedback on that. And my goal now my kids are older now. I've got two that are married, and I've got 16-year-old twins are my youngest. And they're always back at the house. We're always having fun. We're such a happy, functional family that supports each other and loves each other. I know what that feels like. And my mission is for other people to know what that feels like and to work towards that goal. And so that's the project that I'm most excited about, that I help parents with. Anything I can do to be helpful, I love to do that. So
Thank you. Thank you so much. Are there any final words, anything I haven't asked that you would like to share?
I think you've done a great job, Irene. I think you've given me a chance to talk about some different things. The one thing I will end with is this, is understand that the pursuit of being a good parent to your kids, especially those that are strong-willed, you're going to have setbacks. And it's going to make you want to give up, right? You're going to say, I'll never get this. You're going to say that a lot. And my wife created a strategy she called 100% accountability and a whole lot of grace, right? And that was my favorite strategy she ever created, because what it did was when you do make a mistake, right, with your kids, and we're going to do it. I mean, no matter how good we think we are as parents, or how hard we work, or how many strategies we create, we're going to do things we shouldn't do, and we're going to fail occasionally. But her strategy, I'm going to take 100% accountability for that misstep. And I'm going to give myself a lot of grace, because I want to hop right back on that train, right? I don't want to let that one mistake derail my train heading in the right direction. And so I'm going to take accountability, and I'm going to apologize to myself and maybe my kids or whoever I need to. And then I'm going to give myself a lot of grace and say, I'm not perfect. I'm never going to be perfect, but I'm going to get back on the train, right? And by doing that consistently, you get better and better and better at making the right decisions consistently, right? You're never going to be perfect, but don't let that derail your train, because that's what the biggest mistake I see parents make. They say, I'll never get this, and they quit trying. They go back to default. And it causes pain and suffering for them and their kids long term. So keep hopping back on that train. 100% accountability, a whole lot of grace. Hop back on that train. When you mess up, hop back on that train. When you mess up, hop back on that train, right? And keep doing that, and you'll keep moving in the direction you want to go. And your kids will appreciate that too. They'll see, my mom and dad love me so much, or whoever it is, that they're keeping on trying. And it gives them, and they say, you know what? No matter how many times I mess up, I can get back on and keep moving in the direction I want to go. And so that's the reason I created that map. Is it's kind of hard to know where you're going if you don't have a map to where you want to end up, right? And so it was a big part of our success as a family, is saying, here's where we want to end up as a family. So now everything we do helps us get back on that train heading in that direction. So that's what I'd like to leave with, Irina.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for doing the work that you're doing of bringing happiness back to families and realizing that they can be functional. They can be, working together no matter how many kids you have. You did an amazing job with 6 kids. I don't know how you do it. I only have 2. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome, Irina. Thank you so much for having me.